Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Tes, Daf 59. Alright, well I guess if we're up to 59, then I guess we're almost up to 60, which is good because let's just keep on moving forward. Alright, we're talking about a singular city that becomes multiple. Okay, well at the beginning we just kind of continued talking a little bit about measuring cities, a little bit more about that. Then we talk about a city that was like kind of not a Rosh Hashanah, and then it became Rosh Hashanah and vice versa, and making an Ayruv in half of a city that has a highway in it. Alright, hopefully you're into that. Chavra, let's get started over here. Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis, at the Mishnah all the way at the bottom. Ein modin element mumche. Oh, so who do we get to measure our Tchum Shabbos? Just any person? No, it's got to be an expert measurer. Okay. Well, what if this expert measurer somehow was uneven anyways? Right? So let's say in the north, the Ayruv was, 2,000 amas. And in the south, the Ayruv was 1,500 amas, let's say. Okay. So Shoman L'Makom Sheriba, so what we pay attention to, the one that we use is the larger one, and we can, I guess, use that amount in both directions. Okay. If he did more in one place and less in another place, Shoman L'Meruba, we pay attention to the larger one. The Gemara asks, didn't we just say that? It wasn't that the same thing twice? Even a slave, even a maidservant are believed, they have ne'emanus, they have trust. When it comes to, we can rely on them to say that the tchum goes until a certain point. Because when it comes to tchumin, we're not going to be machmir, we're going to be mekel, and the Gemara will explain what we mean by that as well. Says the Gemara at the top of Nun Tes Amud Aleph L'makom Sheriba in L'makom Shemiet Lo. So the Gemara wants to know, one second. So the Mishnah had said that Riba L'makom Echad U'miet L'makom Acher Shoman L'makom Sheriba. If he makes the Ayruv larger on one, longer on one side and shorter on the other side, so we only take into account the larger amount. So does that mean that like that you can't carry it all in the other direction? But why not at least be able to? I assume that's what it means, not be able to carry it all in the other direction. But why not? Meaning, if you can go the longer distance, then certainly you should be able to go to the shorter distance. Why does it completely invalidate the shorter distance? So ema af l'makom shriba. No, it means even to the distance that the longer distance. Meaning, you can certainly go the shorter distance and then continue to the longer distance. All right. Riba le'echad u'miyad le'echad chulei. Hasulamali hanuhach. And the Gemara says, one second, the Mishnah says the same thing twice, right? It says, Riba l'makom echad miyad l'makom acher, shoman l'makom sheriba, Riba le'echad miyad le'echad shoman l'meruba. Basically says the same thing twice, which is that if you go the larger distance, we pay attention to the larger distance, not the shorter one. So why the same thing twice? So, halachi karma, this is what the Mishnah is saying. Riba echad umiyat echad. No, if you have two different people who were measuring. So Reuven is measuring in the north and Shimon is measuring in the south. Reuven's measurement is larger than Shimon's measurement. So Shoman the Zeshriba, so we take into account Reuven's measurement, the larger measurement, not Shimon's. Amar Abaye. This is kind of a hard to understand statement. Rashi has a hard time with it. The Art Scroll kind of explains it one way, but this is how the Art Scroll explains it. It's basically as long as he doesn't go past the measure of the city on its diagonal. Remember we learned the other day that in the corner of the city, the diagonal is going to be 2,800 amas. So basically what it's saying is you can't go past 2,000 amas, right? When we're saying that you take the larger shear, that is if like the smaller one is because he made a mistake and thought that when you go from the corner of the city on a diagonal, you only have 2,000 amas. That's not true. You have 2,800 amas. So because this person made a mistake and he has a shorter shear because he thought that the diagonal of the corner could only be a maximum of 2,000, which means that the perpendicular, like if you're just walking straight out of the city to the north, I think it would be like 1,450 amas or something like that, which obviously is too short. You can have up to 2,000. So that is the mistake, that we're talking about, but you can't go, you can't walk further than 2,000 amas or 2,800 in the corners. Alright? So the Mishnah had said that you can rely on a slave or a maidservant to tell you that, where the Tchum goes until, because when it comes to Tchum, we are Mekil, we are not Machmir. So the Gemara says, one second, we have a brayso in which we say that Tchumim are not to be Mekil. On the contrary, Tchumim are to be Machmir, meaning, Midoraisa, there's no limit on how far you can walk on Shabbos. The Chachamim, Davka, are being Machmir, and they made Tchumin. So the whole Indian of a Tchum is Davka Chumra. So why are we saying that we're being Mekil when it comes to Tchumin? So Ravina, Lo lahakal al divrei Torah, lahachmer al divrei Torah. Yes, Ravina says you're right. The whole construct of a Tchum is a Chumra. Right? The whole construct of the Tchum is a Chumra, because Midoraisa, you can walk as far as you want, and yeah, the idea capping the distance that you can walk is a chumrah, sure. However, v'tchumen derabanan. But the fact of the matter is that it's a derabanan chumrah, and therefore, yes, it's a chumrah. It's something that midoraisa we don't have to do, and they're having us do it, so it's a chumrah. It's a strict thing. But if we're going to be, what's the word? I don't know, doing the actual thing, I don't know, executing this chumrah, well then the question is, do we have to be machmir or mekil? We can be mekil in its execution, in its implementation, right? That's what I was looking for. So yes, it's true. Tchum itself is a chumrah. However, that doesn't mean that, in implementing the tchum, we have to take every single chumrah in the book, and therefore if a Eved or a Shifcha says, look, this is what the tchum is, we can believe them. We don't have to be machmir in that. Yes, we have to do it. But in terms of its implementation, we can be mekil in its implementation, but as long as we do it. Alright. Nu Mishnah Chevra. Ir shel yachid v'naisis shel rabim. If you have a city that was shel yachid, what does it mean shel yachid? So, Pasha Pshat, at least according to Rashi, is that it's less than 600,000 people. Okay, you have a city that was less than 600,000 people, and since it's less than 600,000 people, which by the way, that's an opinion of Rashi. Not everybody necessarily agrees that, a Rosh Hashanah is defined by 600,000 people. But Rashi is saying that what we're saying here about, Ir Shel Yachid means that there were less than 600,000 people there. Okay. V'naisis Shel Rabim. And then it became it became very popular. Lots of people moved in, and now there's more than 600,000 people in this city. Ma'arvin Eskula, you can nonetheless, continue to make an Ayruv in the entire city, even though there's more than 600,000 people. And the assumption is that, there's still no big thoroughfare. There's no big highway that's 16 amos wide. So it's not exactly like the Diglei Midbar. It's not exactly like the encampment in the desert. But there are 600,000 people there. And we say that you can continue to make an Ayruv in the entire city so that people can carry. And we're going to see what you can or cannot do if there was a main thoroughfare. There were 600,000 people and a main thoroughfare, which is like exactly Diglei Midbar, which is Rosh Hashanah. So what do you do in that case? Okay, but we're not talking about that now. So if there's less than 600,000 people, you can, even if more than 600,000 people then move in, you can continue to make an Ayruv. If you have a city that had 600,000 people, but then they moved out and now it became, a city with less than 600,000 people, so ein ma'arvin eskula, you cannot just make a regular old Ayruv. Ela imkein asa chutzala ki ir chadasha shebihuda sheish ba chamishim dir and divrei Yehuda. Unless you leave out a portion of the city and have them make their own Ayruv, and that the size of that portion that you leave out is like the size of the city that's called Chadasha in Yehuda, and that has 50 houses, I guess. That is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Shimon Omer says, Rabbi Shimon, Gimel Chatzer shel shnei batim. Rabbi Shimon says that you would have to leave outside of the Ayruv 3 chatzers that each have 2 houses, and they would make their own kind of Ayruvs. So the point being that when it was a Rosh Hashanah, when there were 600,000 people, and then people move out, and now there's less than 600,000 people, we're concerned that maybe once again there will be 600,000 people, and therefore what, Chevra? And therefore don't just make a plain old regular Ayruv as if it was no big deal. Rather, you can make an Ayruv, but do leave off a certain section as a reminder that this is, that if it becomes 600,000 again, then you won't just be able to make a regular old Ayruv. Says the Gemara, Heichi dami ir shel yachid v'naisis shel rabim. So what exactly is so what's an example of a city that was shel yachid, that had less than 600,000 people, but V'naisa Sharabim, then all these people come. Rav Yehuda says, Rav Yehuda kigon diskarta de Reish Gelusa. For example, the town in which the Reish Gelusa resides. I guess he has his own town, so it's a Ir Shel Yachid. And people come all the time because it's the Reish Gelusa. It was basically the head of the exile. You need things from, it's like the Jewish government, because so people are coming all the time. So it's a Ir Shel Yachid, and it becomes Shel Rabim, because lots of people come. And that is an example of a place where you would nonetheless be able to make an Ayruv. Amar Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman says to Rav Yehuda, my time, how come you chose the town of the Reish Gelusa as your example for an Ir Shel Yachid B'naisa Shel Rabim? Well, if you're gonna say, well, because since people are coming all the time to the Reish Gelusa, and there are people there, and they'll remind each other that the reason why you're allowed to make an Ayruv here is because it's a Yachid V'naisa Shel Rabim, but if it was a Rabim and it remains in Ir Shel Rabim, well, then you wouldn't be able to make an Ayruv. So therefore they remind each other, and that is why you would be able to make an Ayruv there, and that is also why Rav Yehuda chose that as an example. But Kulu Yisrael Nami B'tzafid Shabbat Shchichi Gabe Adade. But that's not really unique to the Reish Gelusa, because every Jewish city on Shabbos they go to shul and to hear the drasha, to hear the shir, and therefore they'll also remind each other. So it's not really something that's unique to this town of the Reish Gelusa. So Ella Amar Rav Nachman could go and discard the Natozai. Interesting. So Rav Nachman says actually the example that the unique example that we're looking for is the town of the Natozai. And Rashi says Natozai is Osa Ish, that fellow, that man. I assume that's a reference to Jesus. I guess he was in some town that was a sleepy town and then got popular. So that, and I guess they're also not reminding each other necessarily about Tchum Shabbos Darton or Ayruv. So even there, you would be able to make an Ayruv. All right, sounds exciting. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Ir Shel Yachid V'naisis Shel Rab. Okay, so if you have a city that was less than 600,000 inhabitants, and then it became a 600,000, it joined the 600,000 club. V'Reshus HaRabim Overes B'Socha, and then there's a big highway that runs through it. So now essentially you mamish have Reshus HaRabim, right? Pashit. It's 600,000 people dartin, and there's a thoroughfare that is 16 amas wide. I mean, that's mamish diglei midbar stuff right there. So, Ketzad ma'arvin osa, so how do you make an Ayruv there? So osa lechi mikan v'lechi mikan, o kore mikan v'kore mikan, v'nosi v'nosim be'emtzachev. Does that sound familiar? So you can either put, so what you could do is you could put a lechi at both sides of the highway where it comes in and out of the city, or a korah at both ends, and then you can carry inside of it, no big deal. So, of course, obviously everyone's thinking Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, right? We've seen it many times in Masechta Shabbos, Masechta Ayruvin, that if you have Reshus HaRabim, when you have two houses on either side of it, you have a house on either side of the Reshus HaRabim, he says exactly this. Just put a lechi on either side, or a korah on either side, and you can carry. So we're going to see in a few minutes that this is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, okay? So we're saying if you have this city that has 600,000 people in it, and there's this big highway running through it, all you have to do is just put a lechi, because after all, it's inside of this city, and I guess we're going to consider the city to be a chutzner, and as long as you put up a lechi on both sides or a korah on both sides, you can carry in, you can carry dartin. Okay. Ve'ein me'arvin osa lachatzoin. But you don't make a 50% Ayruv. And the Gemara on Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis is going to discuss what exactly making an Ayruv in half of this city is. Okay, fine. Ella okula. So rather, either you can make an Ayruv in the entire city, right? So you have a city, and the Reshus HaRabim goes right through the city and cuts it in half. So Rabbi Yehuda says just put up a lechi on both sides or a korah on both sides of the highway, meaning one by the entrance, one by the exit, and then you can make an Ayruv, and we're saying make an Ayruv in the entire city. Make an Ayruv for the entire city. Oh, mavui b'fnei atzma, or each mavui, there's lots of chutzers and lots of mavuis in this city, so each mavi can make their own Ayruv, and we're gonna have to understand what that is as well. or shituf. If the city had 600,000 people in it, and it still has 600,000 people, however, what's unique about it is ve'ein la ela pesach echad. However, there's only one entrance to the city, and therefore it's not like the Diglei Midbar. It's not like the Yidden in the desert, where it was like, in order to be like the Yidden in the desert, it would have to be a thoroughfare that goes all the way through and is 16 amas wide. But here it doesn't go all the way through, because in the desert it was mefulash, it was just open. But here it's just one doorway. So for that reason, we could say that it's not like the Diglei Midbar, and Ma'arvin is kula, and you can nonetheless make an Ayruv for the entire city, even though there's 600,000 people therein. Okay? Frag the Gemara, Man Tana de Mi'arva, Rishus HaRabim. Who is the Tana who says that you can make an Ayruv in Rishus HaRabim like this? So Amar Rav Huna Ber Rav Yoshua, Rabbi Yehuda, he says Rav Huna Ber Rav Yoshua that it's Rabbi Yehuda the Tanya. So we learn in a brayso. I mean, if you look in the Mesoras Hashas, all the times this has come up. It came up in here in Ayruvin already, and Daf Vav, Daf Yud Beis, Daf Chav Beis. Later on it comes up. It also came up in Shabbos and Daf Vav and Daf Kuf Yud Zayin. It comes up. We've seen it many times. Although it looks like we're only going to see it one more time, sadly. All right, what can I tell you? You can always come back and do Chazar of Masechta Ayruvin, if that's your thing. We do always say Hadron Alach, right? When we finish it, we're going to come back to you. So, L'maisa, may as well. All right, B'ezras Hashem. Chayve, let's move on. So the Tanya is, we learn in a brayso, Yasser al-Kain Amar Rabbi Yehuda, that more than whatever in that context of the brayso, the Rabbi Yehuda said, Mishayesh lo shnei batim shnei tzidei Rishus HaRabim, somebody who has a house on either side of Rishus HaRabim, so he's got two houses. Ose lechi mikan v'lechi mikan, or kora mikan v'kora mikan, either put a lechi at both sides of the house or a kora at both sides of the house, v'nosim be'emtza, and then you can carry, in between the lechis and in between the koras, between the walls of your two houses that are on either side of the Rishus HaRabim. Amrulo in ma'arvim Rishus HaRabim b'chach. To which the Rabbanan responded to Rabbi Yehuda, they said, you can't do this. You can't make an Erev Rishus HaRabim like this. So therefore, we want to argue that the Tana who says that when you have this, that Rishus HaYachid that became Rishus HaRabim, and then there's like a big highway running through it, so you could just put up a lechi, some lechis or some koras. That would be Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Okay. Amar Mai, we said earlier, ve'ein ma'arvin oso lachatzayin. Okay. So we said that you have this, what do you have, Chevra? You have this city that it was Shal Yachid, V'naisis Shal Rabim. Okay? And now there's 600,000 people therein, and there's a big highway running straight through the city. So we say put up a lechi on both sides, put up a korah on both sides, fine, and now you can make an Ayruv on the entire thing, but don't make two separate Ayruvs. Don't make two separate Ayruvs for half of the city and the other half of the city. We're now going to discuss how does this work. What are we talking about? So Amar of Papa says of Papa, Lo armu ela leorka, aval lerochba me'arvin. Okay. So says of Papa that that's only lengthwise but not widthwise. So if you can imagine a city, north, south, east, and west, and you have this highway running straight through the city, north, south, okay? So, and then that's basically dividing the city in half. Now you have a western side of the city and an eastern side of the city. So what Rav Papa is saying is that, when the brayso says that you can't make an Erev Lachatzayin, that you can't have half of the city make their own Erev, let's say, the eastern half of the city make their own. Well, when we say that you can't have two separate Erevs, so what Rav Papa is saying is that means that you can't have the eastern side of the city make their own Erev and the western side of the city make their own Erev. Fine. Now, there are two things that we have to understand over here. One is that basically the city is comprised of lots of different mavus, okay? And also that the two sides of the city share that highway, okay? So now, here's the thing. When it comes to a mavui, okay, so let's just say, take like a plain old mavui, a shitufei mavos, okay? So you got a mavui, you got a few chutzers that open up into the mavui. In order to be able to carry in that mavui, right, aside from, all the chutzers have to make their own Erevs. I assume all the chutzers have to make their own Erevs. Although we did say something recently about only having to do it in Ayruv in the chutzer so you don't forget, whatever. I I suspect that I think that we haven't really talked too much about like Eruv Chatzer, so we probably have a lot of that ahead of us. Al Kopanim, what were we talking about again? Right. So you have a mavui, and in the mavui there's like a few chatzers. So in order to be able to carry in the mavui, so all of the chatzers have to join together and do a shitufei mevos, okay? Now, what if one of the chatzers, right, so let's say you have 3 chatzers opening up into the mavui, if one of the chatzers doesn't participate, nobody can carry in the mavui, okay? In order to do a shitufei mevos, everybody has to join in. Now, the interesting thing is that this city is basically lots of chutzers that open up into mavuis and mavuis that basically open up into essentially each other, other mavuis and stuff. And there's lots of different mavuis in the city. So in order to make an Ayruv in the city, you're essentially making a big shitufei mevoos with all of the different mavuis in the city. So now, if we apply this halacha of shitufei mevoos, which is that everybody has to participate, and if somebody doesn't participate, well then they mess it up for everybody else. Well, now we get to our next point. Our next point is that both halves of the city share this highway. What does it mean that they share this highway? It means that, well, how are you going to get out of the city? There's only one way out of the city. Well, I guess 2 ways out of the city, but both of them involve this highway, right? The highway comes into the city and it goes out of the city, right? It goes straight through the city. If you want to leave the city, you're going to have to walk on this highway to get out. Now, both halves of the city have to get out of the city the same way, by you getting onto that highway and getting out, which means that they both share the highway. And therefore, since they share the highway, that highway area is essentially like a mavui, right? Imagine a mavui that's shared by 2 different chutzers. Well, in this case, it's kind of a mavui that's shared by both parts of the city. Now, because they share that space, well, therefore, that highway just essentially is essentially joining them together and making it just one big city, essentially. And therefore, if half of the city makes their own basically big shitufei mevos, and the other side of the city, so the eastern part of the city, they do their own big shitufei mevos, and the western part of the city, they do their own big shitufei mevos, well, that's not going to work because they have to do a shituf. They all have to participate in the shituf. And if somebody doesn't participate in the shituf in mevos, well then it's invalid. It doesn't work. Just like when you have three chutzers that open up into a mavui, all 3 chutzers have to participate in the shituf in mevos. And if one of them doesn't participate, well then nobody can use the mavui. Well, the same thing over here. Since they both share the highway that joins together both the east and western side, brings them together, and therefore if only the eastern side of the city makes their own big shitufei mevos, but the western side didn't participate, well, that basically invalidates their big shitufei mevos, and nobody can carry in the eastern side. And the same thing, stands for the western side. That if they did their own big shitufei mevos, but didn't include the eastern side, well, they're not going to be able to. Nobody's going to be able to carry none of the big shitufei mevos. Nothing works, and nobody can carry. So that is what Rav Papa is saying. That when you make an Ayruv in the 2 halves, i.e. the eastern half makes their own Ayruv and the western half makes their own Ayruv, well, that is not going to work because they share the highway, and therefore the highway kind of joins them all together, and since they didn't make one big Ayruv together, it's not going to work. Now, and when I say Ayruv, I mean shitufei mevos, because of course, as we've seen a number of times, in the context of a mavui, we call it shitufei mevos, but it's the same construct as an Ayruv for a chatzer. Fine. Now, however, what if instead of making the Ayruv east-west, they make it north-south? And that means that you basically, take a line and you draw a line from smack in the middle of the eastern side of the city to, all the way to the middle of the western side of the city. You have a northern side, now you have a northern section, and you have a southern section. Now, what's interesting about this setup is that in this case, each side, the northern side and the southern side, has their own entrance and exit into the city, right? So therefore, they're not dependent. They don't really need to share anything with the other side of the city, right? Because since you're dividing it in half, north and south, well, there's where the highway enters into the city in, let's say, the south, and then exits the city in the north. So the northern part, they can exit the city, enter and exit the city from their own entrance in the north. The southern part of the city can enter and exit the city from their opening in the south, and therefore they're not dependent on each other at all, and therefore you can complete them. You can treat them as being completely separate and self-sustaining. So in that case, says Rav Papa, they would be able to, the north part can make their own Ayruv. That would include, the east and western parts, sides of the highway in the north, and the same thing in the south. 2 Ayruvs, the northern Ayruv, the southern Ayruv, and that would work because they don't share anything with the other side. And as long as all the entire southern part joined together, so everybody joined together was included in this Shitufim Vos, that works. And the same thing for the northern side, well, the north and the south, whatever. So that would work. So back in the Gemara, Amar Mai, we said Ein Ma'arvin Osa Lachatzayin, that you can't make an Ayruv, in 2 halves of this city that was Shal Yachid and became Sharabim. There's a highway through the middle. Amar Papa lo Amru Ela Orka. Rav Papa says that that's only if you're going to divide the city in half lengthwise, i.e., to eastern part and western part, but they both share that highway to get in and out. Aval l'rochba, if you divide up the city by its width, i.e., north-south, well then me'arvin, you would be able to make an Ayruv because they don't share, the north and the south don't need to share anything. Kiman, who's that like? Dilok Rabbi Akiva. Well, that must not be like Rabbi Akiva, Di'ik Rabbi Akiva, because if it's Rabbi Akiva, ha'amar regal amutaris b'mkoma, oser shelo b'mkoma, that people were able to walk in one place makes it usher in the other place. What does that mean? So that is talking about when you have 2 chutzers, okay? One is, so like, the way it works is that there's Rishus HaRabim, and then from Rishus HaRabim, you walk into one chutzer, and then, let's call it chutzer A, and then from chutzer A, you walk into chutzer B. Now, chutzer B doesn't have its own entrance and exit to Rishus HaRabim. They must always walk through chutzer A in order to get to Rishus HaRabim. So basically what happens is, if chutzer A, which has an entrance and exit to Rishus HaRabim, makes their own Eruv Chatzeris, and chutzer B made their own Eruv Chatzeris, but they didn't join together between the 2 chatzeres. So what ends up happening is that since Chatzer A is used by both Chatzer A and Chatzer B, because Chatzer A obviously uses their own Chatzer, and Chatzer B uses Chatzer A in order to get to Rishus HaRabim, well, therefore it becomes kind of like a shared space, and we know that in order to use an area that's shared by many people, you have to make a special Ayruv. You have to make an Ayruv for that. And because A and B didn't make an Ayruv together, so interestingly, what happens is that Chatzer B, the inner Ayruv, the inner Chatzer that doesn't have their own exit, so Chatzer B can carry in their own Chatzer, because nobody else is going in there except for them, and they made an Ayruv. But the people in Chatzer A are unable to carry in their own Chatzer, since the people from Chatzer B use their Chatzer, and they didn't make an Ayruv with the people in Chatzer B. So what Rabbi Akiva is saying is that basically people who are allowed to walk in their own place, i.e. the people in Chatzer B, they can do whatever the heck they want in their Chatzer, they can carry, because they made an Ayruv Chatzeros, but they make it usher for the people in Chatzer A to carry in their own Chatzer, since the people of B necessarily have to walk through A in order to get to Rishus HaRabim, and they didn't all make an Ayruv together, so the people in Chatzer B can carry in their own Chatzer, but the people of Chatzer A cannot carry in their own Chatzer, even though they made their own Eruv Chatzeros, since the people of Chatzer B are gonna, pass through their Chatzer in order to get to Rishus HaRabim. So Rabbi Akiva is saying that you can have a situation where one Chatzer is technically able to carry, but makes the other Chatzer unable to carry. So here also, we want to say that since we're saying that according to Rav Papa, the northern part of the city can make their own Ayruv, and the southern part of the city can make their own Ayruv, but Rabbi Akiva theoretically would say that one side of the city would make it usher on the other side, and I guess that they would both make it usher on each other, I guess. So, fine. But you could say, look, Afilu Tema, where are we? Afilu Tema Rabbi Akiva, you can even say that Rabbi Akiva would agree with the, that Rav Papa's statement can even make sense with Rabbi Akiva. How come? Because Adkan lo ka'am Rabbi Akiva asam ela b'shtei chatzeres zolifnim mizo, because Rabbi Akiva was talking about when you add chatzers A and B, right? Chatzer B is more inner than Chatzer A. Chatzer A can get in and out of Rishus HaRabim, but Chatzer B cannot. They have to go through Chatzer A. So the pnim is leisle pischa acharina. The right Chatzar B has no choice but to walk through Chatzar A in order to get out, and therefore that makes Chatzar A necessarily a shared space. But this is different because in this case, the northern people use their entrance and exit from the north of the city, and the southern people use their entrance and exit from the south of the city. They're completely self-sufficient. Nobody's depending on the other. Nobody needs to walk through the other. And therefore, even Rabbi Akiva would agree that you would be able to make an Ayruv in such a fashion where the northern people make their own Ayruv and the southern people make their own Ayruv. Ikadamri, there are those who say, Amar Papa, says Rav Papa, Lo tema leorkahu de lo ma'arvin aval rochba ma'arvin. Don't say what we just said. Don't say that the only case where you would be unable to make this 50% Ayruv is when you're dividing it east-west, lengthwise, right? Aval rochba ma'arvin, but you would be allowed to make a Ayruv, if you split the thing in half north-south, right? And then northern people make their own Ayruv and the southern people make their own Ayruv. Ella, afilu l'rochba nami lo ma'arvin. Rather, you can't even make an Ayruv north-south. Kiman, who's that like? Rabbi Akiva. It's like Rabbi Akiva because Rabbi Akiva says that one chatzar will make it usher on the other one, and we're not right now we're not going to give the explanation that we gave before to say that it's different because in that case chatzar B necessarily needs to go through chatzar A, and that's not the case here. We don't say that. Rather, what we say is that just like Rabbi Akiva says over there, that one chatzar is able to make it usher on the other chatzar. So here also, you have these two parts of the city, one of them is going to make it usher on the other. So afilu temer rabbanan, and the Gemara says, well, you can actually even argue that the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva in the case of the two chatzars, and they say that chatzar A would be allowed to carry, they would nonetheless say that over here, this Ayruv would not work when you have the northern Ayruv and the southern Ayruv. Because Adkan lo kamir rabbanan hasam, the only reason why the rabbis say over there that chatzar A would be allowed to carry, even though chatzar B has to walk through it, is ela b'shtei chatzer zo lifnim mizo, is when you have two chatzers, one is more deeper, further in than the other, the pnimis achda lidasha umishtamsha, because we could tell the chatzar B, the inner one, just, hey, close your gate, don't use chatzar A on the Shabbos, it's not right. Right? As Rashi, I think, mentioned the midas stone kind of thing that we talked about the other day, also in the context of chatzeros, which is like, hey guys, you're causing trouble for chatzar A. Meaning, again, we have a situation where you have chatzar B, the only way for them to get out to Rosh Hashanah is through chatzar A. And because they need to use chatzar A, all of a sudden chatzar A can't carry in their chatzar anymore. So we say to chatzar B, we say, hey, you guys are causing a headache for chatzar A. Don't leave your chutzner for all of Shabbos. Just stay in your chutzner. You've done all your shopping already on Friday. Just don't go into chutzner A. Leave them alone so that they can carry. But over here, but over here, there's no divider between this highway, right? A highway is a highway. There's no doors on highways. You can't close a highway. And therefore, although I guess we see recently that there are ways of closing highways in all sorts of different ways. But nonetheless, they don't put a door there. Either they just stand there or whatever it might be. So when it comes to these two chutzers, there's a door, Darton. And we say, look, just close the door and don't go out. But over here, there's no door on the highway. And for that reason, even the Chacham would say that this Ayruv wouldn't work. So it's just two ways to understand Rav Papa's opinion about when we say that you cannot make a 50% Ayruv. The first opinion was that is only when it's divided east-west, but north-south would be okay. The second opinion is that both of them would be unacceptable. Omar Mar, we said earlier, Okula o mavi b'fnei atzma. So we said we have two options for how we can make an Ayruv in this Rosh Hashanah that became Rosh Hashanah, and there's a highway going through it. And then you put up the lechis. So one option is you just make a Ayruv for the whole city. One Ayruv for all of the mavois in the city. The other option was O mavi b'fnei atzmo. Each mavoi can make its own basically shitufei mavos. But one second. Ma'ishna de lechatzayin de lo de asri adade. How come we said that one, right? So let's just take whatever. How come we said that when you have two halves, they can't make their own Ayruvs? Well, because in order to make an Ayruv with all these mavois, you have to include everything, the entire city. And therefore, if you only have half of the city and you're not including the other half, well then the shituf is not going to work. Well, shouldn't we say the same thing over here? How could we recommend that every mavui makes their own Ayruv, but they're leaving out the other mavuis, and we have to include all the mavuis? So, meaning Ayruv, meaning shituf. So, mavi nami asri adade. Here also, by all the mavis, they should make it, the fact that we're not including all of them, well, we need to include all of them. They should make the uninclusion of the other mavuis makes it a problem for basically invalidates the little individual shitufs that are going on. So, achav ma'iskin, here what are we talking about? Going to avu daka, that every single mavui had like a door to the mavui, like a little door. What does Rashi say? Pesach namuch, yeah, a small little opening. Birosh kol mavui, at the entrance of every mavui, that it makes it clear that each mavui is intending to be their own self-contained unit. And therefore, because each mavui is making it clear that they intend to be their own self-contained unit separate from all the other mavuis, that is why they can make their own shituf and mivos, even though they're not making up one big one with everybody. Amar Rav Idi bar Avin, Amar Rav Chizda, it's like what Rav Idi bar Avin said, the name of Rav Chizda, Echan mibnei mavui, she'asa daka lepischo, eno oser al bnei mavui, that if you have a mavui with like 3 chatzers in it, and one of the chatzers makes like a door, like a special small little door to his chatzar to say, hey, leave me alone, well then he doesn't have to be included in the shitufei mivos, and the other 2 chatzers can make their shitufei mivos and use the mavui, even though the other chatzar is saying, keep me out of it. Chevra, let's move on. So we said if the city was for many people and was there a Rosh Hashanah at 600,000 people, it's still 600,000 people. So then we said if there was like one door at the end of it, there wasn't like a big highway running through it, so then you could still make an Ayruv. So Reb Zera arva lemata deve Reb Chia. So Reb Zera was assigned the task of putting up an Ayruv in the city of Reb Chia. I assume that this is not, I'm guessing that this is not Rav's uncle Reb Chia, who was kind of like in the same generation of Rebbe, because I think this was in Bavel, and we have all sorts of generations here. We have Abaye, I think, and we mentioned this Rav Chia bar Asi. It's somebody else, I think. I think Rebbe Chia, his father's name was Avo? Or no, Rav's father's name was Avo? So, whatever, but they were brothers. So who was Reb Chia's father? Anybody know who was Reb Chia's father? Reb Chia's father, Chana. I think Reb Chia's father, one second, there's Rabba bar Chana. No, I think maybe Chana. Can't remember, we'll have to see. I have to look it up. Anyways, so Reb Zera arva lemata deve Reb Chia. So Reb Zera was tasked with making a Ayruv in the city of Reb Chia. V'lo shavak la shiur, and he didn't leave anything over, right? Because we had said that when you have a city that was a Rosh Hashanah and then it became Rosh Hashanah, so the only way you can make an Ayruv is if you leave over some parts. So Reb Zera was making this Ayruv and he didn't leave anything over. He just made a regular Ayruv. So Amalei Abaye says to Reb Zera, my time of oven marhachi, how come you didn't leave anything over? So Amalei, so Reb Zera said to him, Save dida, because the elders of the city, Amrli, they said to me, Rav Chia bar Asi ma'ariv kula, that Rav Chia bar Asi, he would put up an Ayruv in the entire city and he wouldn't leave anything over. So Reb Zera said, look, I didn't think to leave anything over. V'amina, I figured, Shmamina, Irshal Yachid, V'naisis Sharabami. And I figured that, okay, it must be a situation of a Irshal Yachid, alright, a city that was not a Rosh Hashanah, that was, less than 600,000 people, and it became Sharabim. And we said that in that case, when it was an Irshal Yachid, V'naisis Sharabim, you could just push it and make a regular Ayruv. So that's what I figured that's what I figured what the story was. That's why Rav Chia bar Asi would, just make a regular Ayruv, and that's what I'm doing. So Amrle, so Abaye says, to Reb Zera, Ledidi Amruli, they told me, Hanu Save, right? These elders told me, Hayi Ashba Havala Michad Gisa, no, Rather, what the case is that it was actually a city of Rabim, right, and it's still Shel Rabim. And the only reason why Rav Chia bar Asi would make an Eruv for the entire city was because there was a garbage dump by one of the exits of the city, right? And we said at the top of the page, right, that if you have what do we say? It was a Haisa Sharabim Ba'arei Sharabim. If it was 600,000 people and it's still 600,000 people, if there's only one way in and out, well then you can make an Eruv. And therefore, this is a case of, it's not a case of a city that was Shel Yachid v'Naisa Sharabim. It was Rabim and it still is Shel Rabim. The only reason why Rav Chia bar Asi would make an Eruv without leaving anything over was because there was basically the only reason why Rav Chia bar Asi made a regular Eruv was because there was a garbage dump in the back of the city blocking the other entrance / exit, and therefore there was only one way in and out of the city, and that's why he would make an Eruv for the entire city. However, now that garbage dump has been removed, and therefore well, now it's basically a Haisa Sharabim, Varei Sharabim. It was 600,000 people. It's still 600,000 people, and there are two entrances. So that's just going to be that's like the Diglei Midbar, where it was mifulash, open on both sides. And Ve'asir, you can't just make a regular Eruv. So Amarle Lav Adatoi, and he said, "Wow, I did not realize that." So if that's the case, well then, Mistama, then you probably can't make an Eruv at all. I mean, we only said if it was Sharabim v'Naisa Shel Yachid, but here it sounds like it's Sharabim v'Arei Sharabim. So it sounds like, it sounded like we can't necessarily make a Eruv at all in that case. All right. Clever. Well, that was Daf. We're going to hold it here. That was Daf Nun Tes. So, what did we talk about today? So at the beginning we talked some more about like measuring cities using an expert, and if there's a longer and a shorter, you can go by the longer one. Then we talked about a city that was less than 600,000 people, and then it became 600,000 people. So Rav Yehuda gave the example of like the Reish Galusa, because people are always going over there, and therefore they remind each other. Rav Nachman's opinion take on the thing was like, no, it can even be a place where nobody's reminding each other. The fact of the matter is, if it's a city that was Shel Yachid v'Naisa Shel Rabim, you could still make an Eruv. Then we talked about making an Ayruv. We spent a while talking about Rav Papa's opinion about making an Ayruv in half of a city. If you have a city that was Shel Yachid, v'Naisa Shel Rabim, and there's a highway going through it, and Rav Yehuda, we're saying it's according to Rav Yehuda, and you can put up a lechi on either side or a korah on either side, and then you can make an Ayruv in the entire thing. We said make an Ayruv in the entire thing, but not in half. So the first way of understanding Rav Papa is that this means only, don't do it if you're going to be dividing in the city in half, east-west, meaning an eastern side of the city and a western side of the city, i.e. Up and down, north-south. Don't divide it like that. Because they share resources and they would all have to make a shituf together. However, if you divide it into like a northern area and a southern area, and they both have their own entrance and exit, well, then there would be no problem. They can each have make their own Eruv / meaning shituf mivos. The second way of understanding Rav Papa is that no, it's not just when you divide it into an eastern section and a western section. Even if you divide it into a northern section and a southern section, that would also be a problem. Alright, those are like the main sugyas of today. Chaver, I hope that you enjoyed the daf, and peace out, okay?